In September 2010, 16 U.S. Marines were seconds away from walking into their own deaths. A voice came over the radio, calm, flat, Northern English, and stopped them cold. Nobody knew where it came from. Nobody could find the source. When they finally came face to face with the man behind that voice, standing in a field they had been watching for 2 hours, they realized he had been lying in a shallow hole in the ground just 20 meters away. The entire time, they had looked directly at that ground. They had seen nothing. This is what those Marines said about the British ghost they never saw coming. Sangin District, Helmand Province, Afghanistan. The dust here wasn't brown. It wasn't tan. It was the color of dried bone. And it got into everything: mouths, eyelids, the working parts of rifles. By the end of the first week, every Marine in 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines had stopped trying to keep it out. They had learned to live inside it instead. Staff Sergeant Danny Kowalski was 31 years old, from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where his father had spent 22 years working the line at a Harley-Davidson assembly plant. He joined the Marines at 19 after 2 semesters of community college convinced him that whatever he was looking for wasn't in a classroom. By September 2010, he had done 3 deployments, 2 in Iraq, and now this. He wore a small Street Christopher medallion inside his body armor, tucked against his sternum. His grandmother had given it to him before his first deployment. He hadn't taken it off since. 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines had taken over Sangin from the British that month. The handover was smooth and professional, exactly what you'd expect between Allied forces. But the British soldiers who briefed them had a look that Kowalski couldn't quite place. Not fear, not exhaustion, though there was plenty of both. Something closer to relief mixed with a warning. Like men handing over a fire hose to the next team and saying, "Your turn now." Sangin was roughly 1.8 square kilometers, the footprint of 30 football pitches of mud brick compounds, narrow alleyways, and dried poppy fields that stretched to the river. The Helmand River ran along the eastern edge of the district, and every approach to it was watched. Every culvert along every route was a potential device. In the first month, 3rd Battalion would lose more men to those roads than to direct fire. The ground had been killing people for 4 years before the Americans arrived, and it showed no interest in changing its habits. Within the first 2 weeks, Kowalski's platoon started hearing about a British unit operating on the northern edge of the sector. Not regular infantry. Not engineers. Someone had spotted them once at dusk, 2 men moving along a tree line, no vehicles, carrying equipment that didn't match any standard British loadout Kowalski had seen. They were there, and then they weren't. His platoon started calling them the Ghosts. British SAS, Corporal Ray Tanner told anyone who would listen. Tanner was 24, from Baton Rouge, and had an opinion on everything. "I heard they work in pairs. No support, no vehicles. They go out, they disappear for days, they come back. Nobody knows where they've been. Nobody confirmed it. Nobody denied it, either." What the Marines did know was this: in the northern compounds, where Taliban movement had been constant for 2 months, something had changed. Fighters who had crossed that ground freely weren't crossing it anymore. There had been no airstrikes in that sector, nothing locked, no ground patrols from any NATO unit had reported movement. Something had made that ground too costly to use, and nobody in the operations room could say exactly what. Kowalski had a theory. He kept it to himself. The heat in September was still fierce, 43 degrees in the afternoon, with the compounds holding it like storage heaters well past dark. A Marine sweated through his uniform before he had walked 100 meters. The dust stuck to everything wet. The smell of the district was burning plastic, open sewage, and something beneath both of those that Kowalski was never able to name, but would recognize for the rest of his life. His name was James Mercer, and he was 29 years old. He was from Barnsley, South Yorkshire, a town that had built its identity on coal and hard men, and had watched both slowly worn away in the decades since the pits closed. His father ran a plastering business, small but steady, the kind passed down through calloused hands and early mornings. Until James was 21, it was assumed he would take it over. He was good at the work. He had the quality that separates a craftsman from a laborer. He could stand in front of a wall before he touched it and already see what it needed, patient, methodical, unbothered by the gap between where something was and where it needed to be. He walked into an army recruitment office on a wet Tuesday in November 2002 and didn't go back to plastering. He served first with the Parachute Regiment. 2 tours in Iraq, both in the Basra region, both during the period when Basra was at its most unstable. He was a corporal by the time he attempted SAS Selection in 2006, and he approached it the way he had approached every wall he had ever skimmed, with patience and without drama. Selection ran 5 weeks across the Brecon Beacons and the Elon Valley, 40 miles of mountains in the rain, with a 60-pound Bergen and no feedback on whether you were passing or failing until someone told you it was over. Of the 112 men who started his selection course, 8 passed. Mercer was one of them. He didn't celebrate. He went to bed. He didn't talk about selection, not to family, not to old colleagues, not to anyone outside the regiment. It wasn't secrecy for its own sake. It was that he had come to understand early that some experiences don't translate. The attempt to explain them costs more than the silence. By 2010, he had been in the regiment 4 years. His primary weapon was the L115A3, a bolt-action precision rifle chambered in .338 Lapua Magnum. In trained hands, it was accurate at ranges beyond 1,400 meters. Mercer's hands were not average trained hands. His effective range under field conditions was something the regiment didn't publish. What made him exceptional wasn't purely marksmanship. It was stillness. In training, snipers learn to hold a position, motionless, silent, for hours at a stretch. Most men manage 2 or 3 before the body starts negotiating: cramps, thirst, the insects that find you the moment you stop moving. Every sensation your nervous system generates becomes an argument for shifting your weight, scratching, breathing differently. Mercer could hold a firing position for 9 hours. His spotter, a 26-year-old from Hereford named Cooper, had timed it once on a training exercise in Wales, 9 hours and 11 minutes in a shallow scrape in the Brecon Beacons in November, in horizontal sleet, before the directing staff called the exercise due to hypothermia risk. Mercer came out of the scrape, drank a flask of tea, and asked when the next serial began. Cooper had worked with him for 2 years. He was the only man who didn't find the silence unnerving. Their team had arrived in Helmand 6 weeks before the Marines took over Sangin. The task was overwatch in the northern sector, specifically to deny Taliban freedom of movement along a series of routes the regiment had been tracking for 3 months. Those routes were carrying fighters, weapons, and increasingly the components for devices that were killing NATO soldiers on the main supply roads at a rate that had become unacceptable. They carried no vehicles, no fixed base, 4 days of rations, 3 days of water, the L115A3 broken down into a specially constructed carry system, and a medical kit that Cooper described, accurately, as enough to keep you alive long enough to regret not dying. In 6 weeks in that northern sector, they hadn't fired a single shot. That was the point. The voice on the radio. The compound clearance began at 5:30. Kowalski had 16 Marines with him, 2 fire teams and a JTAC, the Joint Terminal Attack Controller, who would call in air support if it came to that. The target compound was 600 meters from the patrol base, along a route that combat engineers had swept twice in the preceding 48 hours. Swept meant cleared to the best of available knowledge. In Sangin in September 2010, that wasn't as reassuring as it sounded. They moved in single file, in silence. The air before dawn had a quality that the afternoon heat always erased, thin and cold in a way that seemed wrong for a place this hot, as if the desert borrowed the temperature from somewhere else each night and returned it at first light with interest. Dust muffled their footsteps. Nothing moved in any direction. They were 400 meters from the target compound when Kowalski heard it. Not an explosion, not a shot, a voice. Calm, flat, Northern English. Coming from a radio channel they had been asked to monitor 40 minutes before departure, from an unfamiliar call sign. Stop moving. Kowalski's hand went up. 16 Marines stopped. Left side of the track, 12 meters ahead. Pressure plate. You've walked inside the secondary trigger radius. Don't back up. Hold your position. Kowalski looked left. The ground was featureless, dust, grit, dried vegetation. There was nothing visible. Nothing at all. "Who is this?" he said into the radio. A pause. 3 seconds. "Someone who can see it." The disposal team took 40 minutes to reach them. In those 40 minutes, 16 Marines stood still in the dark on a road in Sangin, guided by a voice on the radio that none of them had cleared, from a position none of them could locate. Every few minutes, the voice came back, calm, practical, updating them on the disposal team's approach, noting a second pressure plate 11 meters to the right that the engineer's sweep had also missed. When the disposal team arrived and confirmed both devices, a daisy chain IED with enough charge to have taken the 3 lead Marines, Kowalski looked in every direction for the source of the voice. There was no one there. They continued the clearance, reached the compound, found the cache, 42 AK-47 magazines, 6 RPG rounds, and 23 kilograms of ammonium nitrate, enough to build 3 more devices like the one they had nearly walked into that morning. They photographed it, catalogued it, destroyed it in place, and returned to base. That evening, in the operations room, Kowalski wrote his after-action report. In the additional notes section, he wrote, "Unknown call sign, possible British SF, provided IED location via radio during patrol. 2 devices confirmed. No visual contact established. Request identification of unit." Regiment replied the next morning. The identification request was declined. Tanner was the one who said it out loud. He said it the way men say things they mean to sound casual about, but don't, standing in the operations room doorway with a water bottle, watching Kowalski read the reply. "I don't know what that guy is, but he just saved 16 lives from a hole in the ground we couldn't see. I want to shake his hand. I want to buy him a beer. I want to know what the hell he eats for breakfast." Nobody laughed. It wasn't that kind of moment. Kowalski folded the denial of identification, put it in his breast pocket, and didn't throw it away for the rest of the deployment. The second contact. The next time the voice came on the radio was 4 days later. The second contact happened in daylight. Kowalski's platoon had been tasked with holding a blocking position on the eastern edge of the district while a parallel clearance operation moved through compounds to the south. Their job was simple: stop any fighters breaking north, hold the ground, report movement. The kind of task that sounds straightforward until you're in it, and then the straightforward part is the first thing you stop believing. They had been on position for 2 hours when the radio came alive. Same voice. Same accent. 7 men moving north through the tree line, 300 meters east of your position. Armed. They haven't seen you. Kowalski raised his binoculars. The tree line was a thin strip of poplars running parallel to the river, leaves dried and yellowed by the heat. He scanned for 30 seconds before he found them, 7 shapes moving fast in the shadows, weapons carried in the way that means they know how to use them. "Confirmed," he said. "We see them. They'll break from the tree line in approximately 40 seconds at the northern end. There's a gap in your cover at that point. Move your eastern fire team 20 meters right before that happens." Kowalski moved the fire team. 42 seconds later, not 40, the fighters broke from the tree line exactly where the voice had said. The fire team was in position. The engagement lasted less than 3 minutes. In the silence after, Kowalski looked east, then north, then south. He looked at the tree line. He looked at the ridgeline 900 meters behind it. He looked at the riverbank, the dried fields, every piece of elevated or covered ground within sight. He couldn't find him. That's two now. Kowalski turned. 15 meters behind the position, in a shallow depression in the ground that he had looked at twice during the approach and registered as nothing, two men were rising from the earth. British DPM, but modified past regulation, additional material sewn into the fabric, irregular shapes that broke the human outline in ways that made the eye slide off them. One carried the L-115A3 in a carry configuration Kowalski hadn't seen before. He was shorter than expected, lean, dust in every crease of his skin and clothing. He looked like the ground itself had decided to stand up. Kowalski stared. He was aware that he was staring. Staff Sergeant Kowalski. Not a question. Yeah, Kowalski said. And then, because nothing else came immediately, how long have you been there? Since before you arrived. Kowalski looked at the depression, barely enough to hide a man lying flat, in a field that had been inside his line of sight for 2 hours. He had looked directly at that ground. I didn't see you, he said. No, the man said. You didn't. No arrogance in it. No performance. A statement of fact delivered the way you'd confirm the weather. They spoke for 11 minutes. Kowalski asked 3 questions. Mercer answered all of them directly and didn't ask anything back. Before they left, Cooper shook hands with 2 Marines without speaking. Mercer shook Kowalski's hand last. His grip was firm and unhurried, the grip of a man with nothing to establish. Within 20 seconds of moving into the tree line, they were gone. Within 40, Kowalski couldn't be certain of the direction they had gone. Private First Class Hernandez, 19 years old, from El Paso, had been at Kowalski's right shoulder the whole time. He hadn't spoken until now. What the hell is he said. Kowalski watched the empty tree line. SAS, he said. Yeah, but what? I don't know, Kowalski said. I don't think there's a word for it. He turned back to his platoon and gave the order to consolidate. Just a quick moment, thank you for spending your time with me. If you've enjoyed this story and would like more like it, please subscribe to British Military Chronicles. It genuinely helps the channel, and it keeps these accounts alive. Right, let's carry on. The working relationship. What followed was quiet. That was the part Kowalski would remember most clearly. In the days after the tree line contact, the working relationship between his platoon and Mercer's team became informal, unannounced, and entirely absent from any official paperwork. There was no agreement, no handshake arrangement, no operations room sign-off. What there was a pattern. Mercer's call sign would appear on the monitoring channel before a patrol, and something in the sector would have shifted by the time the patrol went out. A route assessed as high risk would be quiet. A compound that had shown movement the previous day would show none. A particular approach that Kowalski had planned to use would receive a short radio note, not a warning exactly, more a suggestion, I'd go the other way. Kowalski always went the other way. He started to understand what Mercer was doing, not tactically, he had understood that immediately, but in the larger sense. Mercer wasn't trying to kill everyone in the sector. He was trying to make the sector ungovernable for the people who wanted to kill everyone in the sector. Those aren't the same thing. The difference between them requires a kind of patience that Kowalski hadn't encountered before. In 9 years of service in the American military, patience was a virtue acknowledged in training and ground down by deployment. The pressure to be active, to move, to produce results that could be logged and sent up the chain, it was constant. It wasn't cowardice or impatience from any individual. It was structural. Action meant progress. Inaction looked like failure, regardless of what that inaction was actually producing. Mercer operated from a different assumption entirely. For him, nothing happening was often the result. The empty route was the victory, even if it appeared in no report, earned no recognition, and generated no statistics anyone could present at a briefing. Kowalski found this genuinely remarkable. He wasn't given to hero worship. He had been in combat long enough to be suspicious of men who seemed too composed under pressure, who didn't show the seams. In his experience, that kind of composure was either a sign of genuine capability or something more dangerous. Mercer bothered him differently, because Mercer wasn't unbothered. He was, Kowalski came to sense, very carefully bothered by exactly the right things, and had done the work over years to stop being bothered by everything else. The sorting of those two categories was invisible from the outside. It looked like calm. It wasn't calm. It was the result of a long time spent deciding what deserved your disturbance and what didn't. He found this out on the one occasion they shared ration packs at a patrol base during a joint tasking that required an overnight. The food was cold and tasted of its packaging. The valley below them was completely silent, the kind of silence that has weight. Mercer ate without speaking. Cooper read the same paperback he had been carrying for 3 weeks. Kowalski asked how long Mercer had been doing this, the waiting, the holding still. Mercer considered the question. Which part? All of it. He looked at the ground between them for a moment. Long enough that the waiting doesn't feel like waiting anymore. It just feels like part of the work. Kowalski turned that over for a while. Does it get easier? It changes, Mercer said. Easy is the wrong word. That was all. In the morning, the team was gone before first light. Kowalski went back to Sangin with his platoon, back to the routes and compounds and the dust that never stopped. But something had shifted in the way he moved through those days. Something in the way he measured progress had stretched slightly without his noticing. He didn't try to become something he wasn't. He didn't change how he operated. But he thought about what Mercer had said for a long time afterward. The operation. There was one operation where they worked together directly, with proper planning and a shared objective. Mid-October 2010. Intelligence had identified a Taliban command node operating from a cluster of 3 compounds on the northern edge of the district, the same compounds Mercer's team had been watching for 6 weeks. The node was coordinating IED placement across 4 kilometers of the main supply route. That route had killed 7 NATO soldiers in the preceding month. Disrupting the node was a priority task. The plan was clean. Mercer's team would take an overwatch position on the high ground to the northwest. Kowalski's platoon would approach from the south along a route Mercer had personally assessed. A second Marine element would hold the eastern approach. Start time, 4 o'clock, before the compounds were fully active. They briefed the previous evening. Kowalski had planned dozens of operations, sat through hundreds of briefings. What struck him during this one wasn't the target layout or the confirmed intelligence, everyone had that. It was the detail beneath the detail that Mercer brought. He knew the guard rotation on the northern wall changed at 3:20 every night. He knew this because he had watched it happen from 1,000 meters, 4 nights in a row, to confirm it wasn't a coincidence. There was a dog in the compound, eastern side only, that would generate noise from that direction but not from the south. And there was a section of compound wall on the western face where the mud brick had weathered down to a point where it would take a man's weight if needed. He knew these things because he had spent 6 weeks watching, and had used every hour of that time deliberately. How do you keep track of it all? Kowalski asked once the others had stepped outside. Mercer looked at him steadily. You sit still long enough, you start seeing what changes and what doesn't. What they do every single time, and what they only do sometimes. He paused. Most of what looks like observation is just patience that ran long enough. The operation launched at 4 o'clock. It went differently from planned. They always do. The guard change came at 3:18 instead of 3:20, 2 minutes early, which meant Kowalski's lead element was still 40 meters short of the southern wall when the new guard took position. In another operation, under other circumstances, that gap would have been a serious problem. Mercer held. He kept the new guard in his scope for the 4 minutes it took Kowalski's element to close the distance and press against the wall. 4 minutes. Kowalski, flat against the mud brick, watching the guard silhouette 7 meters above him, knew exactly what that meant. If the guard turned south, if he stepped to the edge and looked down, the operation ended loudly and badly. The guard didn't turn. Later, when the dust had settled and they were consolidating, Kowalski asked Mercer directly, had he been carrying the guard in his scope during those 4 minutes, ready? Yes, Mercer said. What was the distance? 840 meters. Kowalski knew the rifle's effective range. He knew what a shot at that distance required: wind compensation, elevation adjustment, breath control, trigger discipline, all of it, in the dark, with Marines 17 meters from the target and no margin for error. He knew what it meant to hold that calculation live in his head for 4 minutes without moving, without error. He didn't ask anything else about it. The node was disrupted. 2 of the 3 compounds were cleared. 4 fighters were detained. 3 weeks later, intelligence confirmed the IED coordinator hadn't returned to the district. During the extraction, Kowalski watched Mercer's team move back through the waypoints until he couldn't see them anymore. 90 seconds, roughly the time it takes to fold a map, and then the ground was empty. Sergeant Marcus Webb, from Durham, North Carolina, Kowalski's vehicle gunner, 2 tours together, not easily impressed and careful with words, said this quietly, watching the same empty ground. I grew up thinking we were the best in the world at this. I still think that. But that man does something we don't even have a name for. Kowalski didn't answer. He didn't need to. What stayed? The deployment ended in November 2010. Kowalski flew home to Milwaukee. He spent 3 days doing nothing, which he had told his wife he would do, and found impossible. On the 4th day, he drove to his father's old place and spent the afternoon in the garage, sorting tools that didn't need sorting. He wasn't sure what he was looking for in there. He was sure he didn't find it. He thought about Sangin, the way deployments surface in you, in fragments, at unexpected moments. The smell of hot dust from a summer road. The quality of silence before the city woke up. The particular weight of standing still in the dark while someone you couldn't see told you not to move. He thought about Mercer differently. Not in fragments, more like a question he kept coming back to. There is a kind of soldier, not common, not easily described, whose capability has been so completely absorbed into him that it no longer looks like capability. It looks like character. Kowalski had met a handful of men like that over 9 years. They were never the loudest in the briefing room. They were never the ones who told you what they could do. They showed you once, quietly, and then went back to being unremarkable. Mercer was that, but more distilled, more reduced, like something arrived at over a long time through a deliberate stripping away of everything it didn't need. The instinct toward display. The expectation that action and recognition should arrive together. That doing something and being seen doing it were the same thing. What was left was a man who could spend 9 hours in a hole in the ground in the cold and call it work. Kowalski told his wife something about it one evening, months after getting home. He didn't use Mercer's name. He described what he had witnessed, the IED on the road, the tree-line engagement, the 4 minutes against the compound wall, and then stopped, because he realized the description was accurate but not sufficient. She asked him what the man was like. He thought about the 11-minute conversation. The handshake. The way Mercer had said, "You didn't," without apology or pride. The ration pack meal. The thing about waiting not feeling like waiting anymore. He was the most present person I've ever met, Kowalski said. He was just exactly where he was, all the time. He didn't say more than that. He wasn't sure he could. If you've been watching this channel for a while, you know I don't chase the famous stories, the decorated men, the ones history already handed names to. The ones I keep coming back to are the ones who did something extraordinary and then disappeared back into the ground. Because I think that's where the real story is. If that's the kind of history that finds you, subscribe. There are a lot more of these. And if this one reached you today, leave a comment, tell me which part stayed with you. I read all of them. There is something we get wrong about excellence. We locate it in the moment, the shot, the decision, the action under pressure. We turn it into an event, because events are the things we can point at. And pointing at things is how we explain them to each other. But the shot at 840 meters in the dark isn't the story. It's the evidence. The story is the 9 hours in the rain. The 6 weeks watching a sector from positions no one could find. The 2 years learning to work with one man in silence, until the silence became its own language. The years before all of that, and the years before those. The outcome is visible. The work that produced it isn't. We celebrate one and forget the other, because the other doesn't give us anything to watch. Whoever Mercer is, whatever real men and real operations he is drawn from, he didn't become what he was in Helmand. He became it long before, across 1,000 ordinary days of choosing difficulty when ease was available. Of holding still when moving felt more like progress. Of staying in the work when no one was watching and nothing was being recorded. Kowalski understood this eventually. Not in Sangin. Not on the flight home. It came slower than that, in the garage with the tools that didn't need sorting, in the fourth deployment, in the gradual change he noticed in himself and couldn't entirely account for. What he came to understand was this: the most useful thing he had taken from that clearance operation on the 23rd of September wasn't anything he could put in a report or brief to a platoon. Not a tactic. Not a technique. It was a different relationship with patience. We use that word to mean waiting. We treat it as the gap between where we are and where we want to be, something to be endured, managed, got through. Something that ends when the thing arrives. Mercer's patience wasn't like that. It was active. It was full. He wasn't waiting for the shot. He was doing the work that made the shot possible. And that work was the point, not a means to an end, but the thing itself. Most of us will never lie in a scrape for 9 hours in the sleet. Most of us will never be asked to hold a calculation live in our heads at 840 meters while our allies press against a wall in the dark. But most of us know what it feels like to move when staying still is the right thing. To speak when listening is. To act when holding is. Those aren't military problems. They're human ones. And in the people who have solved them completely, the ones who have done the quiet work long enough that the quiet no longer costs them anything, it stops looking like discipline. It just looks like who they are. Kowalski put it plainly the last time he told this story. He said, "That man taught me the waiting is never wasted." That's what the ghosts knew.